Everybody, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to the October 15th meeting of the Town Council. We get a roll call, please.
Hi, good evening. Councilmember Sayak.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Spector.
Here.
Vice Mayor Jensen.
Here.
Mayor Leonidas.
Here. At this time, I'd like to invite our community pledge leader up, Mr. Dennis Gerber. Would you please come forward? Come around the back. I will share with you a few words about Mr. Gerber. Currently, Dennis Gerber is serving as the president of the Los Gatos Lions Club for fiscal year 19 and 20. He's been in the Lions Club for over 6 years. And if you're not familiar with the Lions Club, just think of our annual holiday parade, Children's Holiday Parade. They sponsor and do all the heavy lifting on that along with our public safety department. Mr. Gerber is also a former Scoutmaster for Troop 834 in San Ramon and he's been with the troop, or was with the troop for over 7 years. He graduated from Dave's Avenue Elementary School, Fisher Middle School, and Los Gatos High School. That means you must have lived here your whole life.
Well, I was gone for a little bit.
Was gone for a little bit. Has a BS in Civil Engineering from San Jose State, and he is the second legacy president of Los Gatos Lions Club, as his father, also named Dennis Gerber, was the president of the Lions Club from 84 to 85. So that is very cool. I will hand over the microphone to you, and if you could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Could everyone please rise? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
How about a round of applause?
Thank you.
My fellow council members.
Thank you.
Here's a gift to you.
Oh, great.
Thank
Thank you.
Dennis.
Thank you.
Another round of applause for Mr. Gerber. Thank you for leading us in the pledge this evening. Next up, we have a couple accommodations. I would like to invite forward Mary Badami for our Small Business Big Applause Award. What can I say about Mary? You've been doing the insurance business for 32 years in Los Gatos. You're also one of our community service officers, and you're on our planning commission. You are, how can I say this? I used you for my insurance, and one of the most honest business people I've ever met. So I hope that people watching tonight at home will continue to use your services in our community for another 32 years. It's been a little while. Would you like to add?
I would just like to make a correction that when I was a community service officer, it was not for the town of Los Gatos, it was Mountain View. But I'm extremely grateful to be a part of this community, and being recognized tonight is truly an honor. Thank you, Los Gatos, for all of your support, and it's a privilege to be of service.
And that's Mary Badami Insurance. Don't leave it. Farmers Insurance, located in downtown Los Gatos. And this is for you to hang on your wall. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, picture? Thank you again, Mary. All right, at this time I'd like to invite up Louise Abigail Wenke. It's not every day you get to help save someone's life.
It was not the other day, for sure.
Would you like to tell us what happened?
I was at Aldo's. If you're from around here, you probably know where it is. Having dinner with my mom, who's in the back, and we saw a lady who became unconscious, and she, I think, had lost a pulse, to my knowledge, and 911 was called, and I began performing CPR on her, and they got a pulse back at the restaurant, and I was informed later that she made it through, so that was very exciting for me.
A remarkable story. I'd also like to invite up our first responders who were involved at the time. Please come forward. We have many of you in uniform this evening. So Louise, how did you learn CPR? When did you first learn CPR?
I'm actually in vet school, so I've only ever done it on dogs. But it's kind of the same idea, and it worked. Yep.
Simply amazing. When we're presented with an opportunity like this in life, we have the first responders, and you have to make a decision. Do I call 911? Do I try to help this person? And you were actually the first responder on the scene. So incredible story. Thank you for your action, your spring to action on that, and saving someone's life, along with all these fine members of our public safety. And we have more accommodations for Louise. Would you like to present them? We have our Fire Chief Tony Bowden here. So in addition to this one from us, I won't read it, but it just talks about what happened. You're very welcome on behalf of the entire town council. Thank you. Tony?
Thanks. Tony Bowden, Fire Chief, Santa Clara County Fire. I just wanted to say, amazing job. Everybody has the ability to make an impact in someone's life. And when it comes to CPR, early, quick CPR is the key point in saving someone's life. And so jumping in, taking action, recognizing a situation and not sitting back, because a lot of us sit back and kind of get nervous, what do I do? But jumping in and making a difference, in this case, made a huge difference in someone's life, and I would suspect their entire family. So how the recognition came about is our local fire company said, you know, hey, we need to recognize this member of the public and the police officers from Los Gatos Police Department, who are critical partners, and oftentimes they're either before us or at the same time and jump in and help with the scene and secure the scene. So just as important, and we just brought some small tokens of our sincere appreciation for not only you, Abby, and it's Abby, right? You, Abby, but also for our fellow police officers. And I understand Paul couldn't be here today, so we have one to take back with him. But we love the partnership with Los Gatos PD Chief. Amazing men and women in your force, and it was a complete team effort. So thank you. And on behalf of Santa Clara County Fire Department, small token.
Wow, thank you.
And also, Abby, for you is a challenge coin from Santa Clara County Fire Department as well. Thank you very much for what you've done.
For all that you guys do.
Yep.
It's incredible.
And then Rich, also for you.
Just as much challenge coin for you as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet.
Congratulations. Thank you again.
And Frank, for you as well. And sincerely, for me, the partnership with fire and law enforcement is incredibly important because it's a team. And welcome to the team, Abby. We're happy to have you in our community.
One more thing I'd like to add before a big final round of applause for everyone up here. The individual was able to walk out of the hospital the very next morning. So probably a split second between life and death. And gosh, they were just so lucky you were at Aldo's that day. Everyone needed Aldo's. It's a good luck place. Thank you again to our everyday heroes as well, our police and fire, who bring us that comfort in living in this fine community and also participated in saving this individual's life. Thank you. Big round of applause. Town Manager, do we have our attorney on the line for a closed session report?
Yes, we do.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Are you able to hear me?
It's very faint. So our attorney is feeling a little under the weather, so she is phoning in this evening, and we are going to bring up the volume so we can hear.
Go ahead.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Deputy Town Attorney Lynn Lampros. I apologize for having to call in to tonight's meeting due to illness. Prior to tonight's regular session, Council met in closed session to discuss the evaluation of the Town Manager. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. Next up is our consent calendar. If any member of the public or the council wishes to pull a consent item, now is your chance. I see no one, so we will move ahead with the motion. Vice Mayor?
Move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 7.
We got a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Next item is verbal communications. If you would like to speak on any item which is not on our agenda, this is your opportunity. I have 2 cards. First is Carl Gardino.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the Town Council. I'm here tonight to answer the question that you've all been pondering for weeks. What should I be doing on Thanksgiving morning? Well, I'm glad you asked. We would like you to join us for the 15th annual Applied Materials Silicon Valley Turkey Trot and our ambitious goal this year that we call Mission 1 Million. With so many families and individuals in need throughout our region, our goal is to raise $1 million from this year's community charity run walk alone to add to the $9 million that we've been able to disseminate in the first 14 years of our Silicon Valley Turkey Trot for Second Harvest Food Bank of Silicon Valley, of Santa Cruz County, the Healthier Kids Foundation, the Health Trust, and the Silicon Valley Housing Trust. To put that goal in perspective, for each of the last 5 years, we've been able to contribute somewhere between $905,000 and $936,000 each year. It's that gap that we want to close because the gap is growing between those in needs and those who are as blessed as most of us in this room. One of the main ways that we can accomplish this goal is you and your networks through our Sand Hill Foundation Mayor's Cup Challenge. And as you know from past years, our Mayor's Cup rewards mayors and council members and town managers who register for our race, either to be there in person or in our remote runner category, where we send you in advance your shirt, your bib, and your medal, and you can just walk around your house and still support the work we're doing as a community. Now, Los Gatos finds itself in the small city or town category, going up against Belmont, Burlingame, East Palo Alto, Los Altos, Menlo Park, San Carlos, and Saratoga. But I believe the Mayor's Cup belongs back here in the town of Los Gatos in our 15th anniversary race. Now, we've heard from numerous council members throughout the region that please also recognize, if we're going to communicate through town media, hard copy or social, or through our individual forms of social media. We've heard that, we listened, and we've adjusted our point system to recognize that type of effort, and I will pass that out to you. But we want you to consider joining us in spirit or physically on Thanksgiving morning, because the turkey trot is still the best way to earn that third slice of pie on Thanksgiving.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gardina. And you will be forwarding an email notifying the town manager of the event on our behalf.
Thank you, sir. I will. I'll be passing this out along with flyers and posters for distribution through our town building here. And I brought you each Santa Run shirts. as well, so that you can start to sweat in style as you train for this year's Turkey Trot and Santa Run. So thank you.
Also, you can dress like a turkey if you want.
I
was
do
there,
every day, sir.
I was there 2 years ago. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Sir.
All right, next speaker is Jeff Siegel.
Good evening. Well, I'm thrilled to be here at a time when Chief Bowden and his team are here, because tonight I want to talk to you about wildfire protection. Two specific wildfire-related matters. The first one is around wildfire evacuation. So the Los Gatos Historical Preservation Society has initiated legislation to ban Waze from directing traffic into wildfire evacuation route areas. This will in part reduce Waze traffic into downtown Los Gatos as well. Together with Mayor Leonardis and Fire Chief Bowden, we met with Evan Lowe's office last week to endorse and further support that legislation. So a big thank you to both of them for their leadership on this matter, as wildfire threats are growing each year to Los Gatos homes, especially those homes that sit in the WUI. The second wildfire matter is around fire protection. Much of the Los Gatos historic homes sit inside the WUI. I presume all of you have seen the WUI map and have familiarized yourself with what has happened to the town of Paradise. I actually visited Paradise recently, and it's a death zone, where street after street burned to the ground in a matter of minutes. Unlike today's modern-built structures, the century-old homes are essentially WUI matchsticks, just waiting to get torched. A single ember can travel over a mile on strong winds, as we have, and with their exposed porches, ancient wood siding covered by dozens of oil paint layers, they are by far the most vulnerable. And as we know now, Los Gatos has a higher wildfire risk score than Paradise. So the question is, are we going to wait until a wildfire hits Los Gatos, burning an entire neighborhood to the ground with many lives lost, or are we going to be proactive in taking action to prevent this destruction from happening in the first place? Fire protection requires retrofitting these historic fire-prone homes, which can be achieved with the right funding. Fire-resistant paint, siding, roof, and porch materials would make a huge difference in protecting against a wildfire and can save lives. So we are here tonight to ask Marcia Jensen whether she would support using Mills Act funding to undertake a wildfire retrofit program aimed at fire protecting our historic homes and, more importantly, saving lives. And considering the 85 lives lost in Paradise, this should be an easy question to answer, but I would really like to pose that question to Marcia. Is this something you can get behind and support?
Mr. Siegel, we have a question from Councilmember Spector.
Absolutely.
Well, given that council members can't just talk to the audience, I have a question. Did you say that Mr. Lowe introduced what legislation on Waze, or that you just discussed the concept with him?
I formally initiated the legislation process with his office about a month ago, and with the support of Mayor Leonardis and Chief Bowden, we collectively now have a lot more support around that. Chief Bowden was very articulate in helping to explain the significance of that kind of action to take and an understanding of the legislative process and what he could provide to Evan Lowe's legislative team to help move that forward. So our intent is to see that to rise to the top of Evan Lowe's legislative priorities, and with the new legislative season that will be starting soon, for that to be formally entered into that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councilmember Sayoc, you have a question for our staff? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Siegel.
Great, but I would still love to get the question answered if possible by,
She would probably do that offline, if the vice mayor, if she so chooses.
Because it's not on the agenda and it's not a scheduled item, and because you are speaking on something off the agenda, I don't feel any obligation to answer your question at this time.
okay. Well, I just want to reinforce the importance of being proactive instead of reactive in the situation like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. So that concludes our regular verbal communications. We will move on to our, oh, now you'd like to.
Yes, just based on this conversation that was not on the agenda, I just want confirmation, is there a town-sponsored legislation as well as a legislation that Chief Bowden is sponsoring that we should review?
We have not seen any bill. We understand that the constituent has provided the idea to the Assembly member's office, and it will start the process from there.
Okay. And so the only request of staff, should that become a legislation that is a formally sanctioned, if we can get a formal copy?
Of course.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along that line, if possible, if we could, the council could be informed of the any process information even before it's introduced as legislation.
Thank you. I'll be happy to follow up with the Assembly member's office.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I was going to take item number 9 in front of item number 8 this evening because we have our fire chief here and he can help potentially answer questions along with members of his staff. So we will go to item number 9, which is the introduction of an ordinance by title only affecting an amendment to Chapter 11, which includes garbage, refuge, and weeds of the town code regarding weed abatement regulations. Mr. Andrews?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. The item before you was initially discussed in January of this year when you approved and accepted the town attorney's ordinance and policy priority recommendations for 2019. As the memo indicates, the last time the weed abatement ordinance was adopted in 1968, it really hasn't been reviewed since then. And given the significance of some of the wildfires that have occurred in our state, especially the northern part of our state the last several years, this was one of the ordinances we wanted to bring forward sooner rather than later. In addition, we bring it forward in tandem with the item that was on the consent calendar, which included an assessment of the wildland-urban interface evacuation capabilities. That assessment identifies some challenges. It also identifies some opportunities, and we feel that making some recommended changes to the weed ordinance as it stands now presents one of those opportunities. By bringing recommended language that expands the definition of what we consider weeds, it will help with the concept of clearing more of those ladder fuels away and creating more of a type of a shaded fuel break, not only within the properties that are currently under the purview of the weed abatement program, but we've expanded it to include another 5 feet in roadways within the WUI. During the existing weed abatement program that the county has, they already talk about 10 feet on either side of roadways, but they really talk more in terms of grasses and weeds. We wanted to make sure that we provide them an additional tool to then look at other types of refuse, including downed limbs and other things like that, that those are now described as weeds in our ordinance, and that'll provide the additional ability to clear any of these flammable materials that could eventually lead to a broader fire from those ladder fuel beds. With that, staff is available for questions. We also have the chief who remained here, thank you, to also facilitate questions if you have any questions of County Fire.
All right, thank you, Mr. Andrews. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. My only question is, does the proposed ordinance conform with the state law that was recently implemented on allowing people to do fire breaks? So as I read this, there was a new state law that said you could basically go into property, the fire department, maybe the chief knows what I'm talking about, he's looking blank, that you could go into property and clear weeds after you gave a notice to the property owner.
So I'm not familiar with the legislation you're talking about, but if I understand the current weed abatement program now, they actually have that authority now to go and inspect a property, and if they find a property deficient by their standards, they can then cite that property, which then moves through a process that we probably come familiar with on a very routine basis. Annually, Parks and Public Works will kind of bring a list of properties that haven't been abated or were abated using outside contractors, and then this council actually puts those properties then on a property tax roll for us to get reimbursed for the abatement that was done. The language in this ordinance just expands on what the expectation will be for property owners in terms of clearing certain segments of their property.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions for staff? Seeing none, I will go to the public. Mr. Rob Stump. I have one card. If anybody else wants to speak, please fill out a card on item number 9.
Mr. Mayor, I probably need to ask a question. I was interested in making at least a comment on the report that was submitted tonight. I know it's not on the agenda, but I've had an opportunity to read the report as well and would just like to offer a comment if I can.
You're allowed to
Okay,
say whatever
thank
you want for 3 minutes.
Okay. Go.
Almost.
By the way, my name is Rob Stump. I'm a resident of Foster Road and one of the leaders of what we call the Civic Center Hillside Neighborhood. We're a group of over 40 neighbors up on the hill that are actively involved, covering a significant portion of the hillside in the Civic Center CERT zone. We've organized to encourage wildfire preparation and prevention. This year, we've focused on building defensible space. We're now undertaking a brush abatement, tree removal, and tree trimming project on over 1 mile of Foster Road. We've developed a hillside emergency evacuation routes. We've developed a communication network with texts, walkie-talkies, email. We are serious about wildfire preparation and prevention. Tonight, I just want to encourage the town to continue on an action-oriented approach. Tonight, you've accepted the Wildland-Urban Interface Evacuation Assessment Report, and also you're introducing this ordinance regarding weed abatement. I wanted to make one comment about emergency evacuation. This is something the town has to take action on. We have feeder streets that are coming out of these hillsides that are not adequate, not appropriate. 24-foot wide streets that by the time you have cars parked on both sides, there's 10 feet. That does not allow the fire department the 20 feet of clearance they need. I think we need to really look at something at least during the wildfire season. So I would certainly ask that that be a focus and an area of action before the next wildfire season. On weed abatement, the ordinance being presented tonight, and I did have a chance to talk to Mr. Andrews about this briefly. I know the county basically has a 10-foot requirement, as do other counties like Sonoma, those have experienced wildfire. I may not fully understand the ordinance as it's written, Mr. Andrews, but I would really encourage that we go broader, wider than 5 feet, just as an example. A comment about enforcement. I think time has really come to step up enforcement, and I'm one of these people that live in the hillside. Enforce. And so just asking that would go forward. Also encourage the town to set an example for weed abatement. Mayor, I'm not sure if you were responsible for what Caltrans is now doing in those interchanges. We had a conversation about that. But that's what needs to be done. Wherever the town footprint is, whether it's the town's responsibility or it is at the county, it could be the state of California, we need to make sure that those things are being cleared up. Last comment, on town budget, we need more money for regular tree trimming in public rights of way. We're going to end up with tunnels of fire in some of these locations. And I just want to say thank you to Arn Andrews for his leadership and his partnership in these last months. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stump.
Question.
We have a question from Councilmember Rennie.
Mr. Stump, as you mentioned, many of your residences are on roads with one way out, and it sounds like your community's really getting involved planning for the emergencies. Have you considered or discussed alternate routes out, walking route outs, and so forth?
In fact, we've shared with Mr. Andrews routes that we have identified and marked so that we have routes out both directions. I guess that would be probably east and west. We've also set up, at least have identified at the top of the hill, a temporary refuge area if people have to go up but can't get out. So we've put a lot of thought through this. We've come up with a couple of alternate drivable routes that take people through private property, but permission is being given. Those are marked with signage.
And I'm curious, are there fences that are in the way? Are you putting gates in the fences to enable this? And
No, and there are, where there are fences is when we get into the other neighborhoods. If we walk up to Aztec Ridge, we potentially run into, gated communities, but there are still ways to get through.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I can just confirm that I spent a harrowing Saturday on the back of an ATV in their neighborhood, witnessing some of the organization that's been going on in their neighborhood. And I appreciate your comments, but I commend you for creating one of the more highly organized neighborhoods in our town.
Thank you.
We have another question. Councilmember Sayak.
I just wanted to confirm, did you say that your neighborhood was, you had several CERT certified?
We are
Residents?
getting people to be CERT certified. We're just using Civic Center Hillside Neighborhood as a designation because it is a CERT zone instead of trying to name us something else that would be confusing to the town.
Okay.
But we're having 2 people attend CERT training starting in October.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. That's the only card I have. We'll close the public hearing. We'll go to council for discussion and/or a motion. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead with the motion. I'm going to move to introduce an ordinance, Attachment 1 by title only, effecting an amendment to Chapter 11, Garbage, Refuse, and Weeds of the Town Code regarding weed abatement regulations.
Second.
So we have a motion. We have a second by Vice Mayor. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Oh, Councilmember Sayak.
It doesn't need to be a part of the motion, but just a request of staff. As we've heard tonight, there's a lot of concern about just fire season. So if you could just put a placeholder for January when we talk about upcoming priority. There have been several different ideas mentioned. Obviously, some are more important than others. And so if we could put on a priority, just a discussion of how we start to rank these and prioritize them. Thanks.
Councilmember Spector.
Understanding that we have a motion on the floor, but what the speaker was saying was very impressive and commendable. Thank you.
I also would like to add thank you to Mr. Andrews for his efforts on this, as well as the fire department. Chief Bowden, your department is wonderful, as well as Mr. Stump's efforts should be acknowledged. And we all were together at an all-day seminar at Villa Ragusa several weeks back, and it's on everyone's mind. So it's a very important topic, and we look forward to more working together and coming up with some great solutions for our community. With that, Councilmember Rennie.
So question for staff. Have we thought about trying to replicate what this neighborhood has done and how we might get others started or energized or motivated to recreate that in some of our other neighborhoods?
I believe we have, and it started actually with our PD department, who has taken a fresh view at the CERT program and the Neighborhood Watch program, and they're actually have been working for, I want to say, about the last 6 months to a year to actually kind of merge those programs because of the synergies that exist. I will also say that Mr. Stump, I've introduced him to several other residents who have expressed an interest in his program, and I believe it is something that can be replicated, but it did start with him going door to door and knocking on his neighbors' doors, and so we just need to keep finding those residents that have that passion for not only their families but for their community and plug them into what we have as an existing CERT Neighborhood Watch program and just embed them into those. So I think there will be more opportunities as more of this gets discussed, and certainly between what our PD is currently doing and then what is obviously a successful strategy in their neighborhood, I think we can continue to make strides.
Thank you. So now I will call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. And if we could read the title.
Ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 11, Garbage, Refuse, and Weeds of the Town Code regarding weed abatement regulations.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 8, which is our beekeeping ordinance, primarily, which we call the first reading of the ordinance by title only amending Chapter 4 entitled Animals and Fowls. And I think Ms. Lampros will be delivering our staff report via the telephone.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Staff is introducing these ordinance amendments for consideration and first reading by title only. There are two parts to this update to Chapter 4. The large update that we did last fall has been very successful in many ways, but implementation revealed the necessity of a tweak to sections 4.60.050 and 4.60.055, animal establishments. It has become apparent that it is not necessary to require registration by trap, neuter, and return organizations. This section historically was directed to animal shelters, and it is more appropriately directed to such brick and mortar shelters, and it unnecessarily burdens TNR organizations, which are a different animal, as it were. The second part of this ordinance update is to Article 8, beekeeping. Last year in the big Chapter 4 update, the town attorney's office was unable to connect with stakeholders in the community in time for deadlines, so changes were not made at that time. The recent annexation of county properties into the town afforded both the need and opportunity to revisit the bee ordinance, as county properties with apiaries objected to the more stringent restrictions in the town's very old ordinance. Beekeeping is gaining prominence, and we understand it to be a necessary endeavor to rebuild our pollinator colonies. As such, the town attorney's office did significant outreach and jurisdictional analysis, as stated in the report, in an effort to find a way to balance this worthy endeavor with some of the concerns that people have living around neighborhood beekeeping. The major concerns people have are how many hives are to be allowed on a property and where are those hives to be located, how far from property lines, streets, dwelling units, etc. There are many ways to craft this, as can be seen in Chart 3 of the staff report. The town attorney's office proposed rules that were more in keeping with our neighboring cities rather than counties, as we determined cities are more akin to the town. Counties often are contemplating larger and more rural properties, but also with an eye toward reasonable enforceability. So we selected the parameters that we did: 6 feet from the side property line and the 10 feet from the back property line, 2 hives on properties 5,000 square feet to 10,000, 3 feet, 3 hives above 10,000, 4 hives above an acre, with an additional hive per additional half acre. The town attorney's office is open to council suggestions if they want to entertain other parameters. Ironically, in the past 6.5 years with the town, we've received very few complaints, but about 2 weeks ago, we did get a number of complaints about one particular residence. The town attorney's office has strengthened this ordinance to be able to crack down on nuisance beehives, even while making it easier to keep bees. But we anticipate that this will please some and displease others. With that, we are available to respond to any questions council may have.
Thank you, Ms. Lampros. I have one question, and this came up at our council meeting several months back when we were talking about annexation of county pockets, and there were a couple people from the public who had a concern whether our bee ordinance would match that of the county. Have we eliminated all those barriers so it emulates the county program?
Actually, the town's proposed ordinance is even more forgiving than the county's. The county ordinance has a 100-foot requirement from property lines for 1 to 3 hives, and the town's ordinance is closer than that, 6 to 10 feet. The county ordinance does allow for 25 feet from a beehive to a property line if there's what's called a flight dispersing barrier, which is a 6-foot fence or hedge that forces the bees, when they fly out of their hive, to fly up as opposed to directly shooting out of the hive However, it's important to realize that bees do come down in their search for pollen and flowers. So it doesn't prevent bees from ever getting down to people height or getting in somebody's yard, but it directs the initial flight path of the bee up and away. Perimeter fences have been deemed in some jurisdictions to suffice as a flight dispersing barrier. So the typical property in the town is going to have a perimeter fence around it within the best practices distance from the fence to the hive. So I went a little more forgiving, more in keeping with the towns and cities of Saratoga, Cupertino, Monte Sereno, et cetera, because of contemplating the different nature of properties in the town than exist in the county. However, this will probably displease some and please others. It certainly does. The new county properties are not under greater restriction than they were in the county.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the town attorney, I realize that the square footage of the property will be a variable, but let me try my question. If you have a property in Los Gatos under this proposed ordinance, and it has fencing on 2 sides and no fencing on 2 sides, how does that property play into your ordinance?
Well, the ordinance still just dictates an amount of space from the hive to the property line, whether or not there is fencing. However, the ordinance was written with some May language that can require the town to, or that can allow the town to require a flight dispersing barrier placed around the hive if need be for cessation of any kind of nuisance problem or orientation of the hive in certain ways to try to minimize encroachment by the bees to a public road or to a neighbor's yard. So we retain tools to allow us to do this, but it was contemplated that most of these properties would be fully fenced.
Thank you. That answered the question.
All right, seeing no more comments or questions at this time from council, I'll open it up to the public, and I have no speaker cards completed. So if anybody wishes to speak, now is your chance. You get 3 minutes at the microphone. If you could just tell us who you are. And
Sure. My name is Tim Dauber. I run a large bee removal rescue business here in the Bay Area. I've actually removed some hives from city properties. I think it's a step in the right direction because the last 30 years I've been breaking the law. Pretty much nobody in Los Gatos has been able to keep bees on their properties with the current regulations. Just recently, about a week ago, I removed 2 extremely large hives from above Los Gatos High School bike corral. They had been there for 15 years. Hadn't caused any issues. Nobody had gotten stung. So I think the regulations that you guys have in place are going in the step right direction. However, I feel that these limitations on the number of hives and all this stuff really depends on the ability of the beekeepers to take care of the hives. So what I find is a lot of these beekeepers that are novices, maybe they're not doing their inspections, their hives swarm, and then we get a call from the neighbor that ends up getting a hive in their front yard or down their chimney, right? And that happens. And that happens with your city trees. You guys have a number of hives that are in trees here on city property. And I think up until about 5 years ago, you guys would call us and we would pull them out of the trees. Now, I don't know, you guys are kind of going in the step in the right direction of wanting to protect bees. But what I've seen with the town is that you guys are actually destroying these hives in the trees. I had one instance where I had a customer call me about a hive that was located in a city tree, and I referred them to you guys because it was a city tree. I couldn't touch it. Well, about 2 weeks later, the town arborist came out, sprayed chemicals inside that tree, and sealed the tree. Up to about 4 or 5 years ago, I think your policy was to rescue these bees and do live removal. I would encourage you guys to do that, but I'm in favor of your new regulations. I feel that these are really a step in the right direction and take kind of that legal risk of keeping bees and move it into the legal limelight, so to speak. That's all I wanted to say.
I have a question for you, and I think we might have one more question. So in the past, were removing hives from city trees and all kinds of places. What do you do with the hives when you remove them? Where do they go?
Yeah, so we have bee yards all over the Bay Area where we keep them. We have city contracts. We used to have a city contract with Los Gatos here about 4 years ago. But I have an active contract with the city of Sunnyvale, Menlo Park, Morgan Hill, Gilroy, Sunnyvale, and Mountain View. These hives end up in areas, and to be honest, we are over the limit in a lot of these places. Do we see that the neighbors have problems with us having hives there? No, because we're maintaining them. It's kind of one of those things, if they're out of sight, out of mind, right? We do have a property in Los Gatos that sits on 16 acres. Up until this point, we've only been able to keep, I think, two hives there. But with now these new regulations, we should be able to keep, my math is correct, close to 33 of these rescued hives. These are not hives that, you know, I'm propagating myself. These are all people call us, they get a swarm, and in many cases we'll remove them for free and find a place what's suitable for them to live. What I would encourage you guys to do is to look at your own city policies as far as having bees in trees, because the reality is there's a lot of feral hives out there. There's feral hives just right up the street where the kids walk past it every day on their way to school, literally 2 feet from the sidewalk, and that's a city tree. So I look at those, because of what I've seen in the past with the destruction of those wild hives, I kind of, when people tell me about them or if somebody complains about them, I say, hey, look, you know, as long as nobody's getting stung, let's just leave them alone. Because from what I've seen the city here now, and to be honest, you're the only city that I see across the whole Bay Area that's destroying beehives in city trees. And I don't know if that's a new policy or something that maybe somebody has taken upon themselves because they don't want to pay the money to have the live removal done. So maybe something to look internally and see what that is. The reality, these hives have been living there without having any complications and stinging anybody. Obviously, people are deathly allergic. It can raise some substance issues, and people are afraid. People are afraid when they walk their dogs, or when the hives actually swarm. It can seem sort of aggressive, but the reality is when hives do swarm and they reproduce, that is at the time when they're least aggressive.
Okay. Thank you very much for the information. We have any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. All right, going back to council for discussion. And, oh, I'm sorry. Please bring your card forward.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Victor. I'm the president of the Santa Clara Valley Beekeepers Guild, and I'm also a journeyman level of the Master Beekeeping Program at UC Davis. And I'm here to represent the Guild and our membership and encourage the council to consider the revised ordinance for beekeeping in Los Gatos. Our members are 400 members active. Our mission is to support and sustain beekeepers in the art of beekeeping, also to do outreach and education. We have reached about 2,000 students to date this year, and we also speak to public service groups as well. It's a very important and active part of our organization, and our last mission is to support scientific research in California for the European honeybees. So I'm here to answer any questions or advise you about beekeeping.
Do we have any questions for the speaker this evening?
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming in. Does anybody else wish to speak? All right, now we will close the public hearing and move on to council with discussion and/or a motion. I have a question. I guess we can start off. The comments from the first speaker about what has happened with the hives in our trees. I don't know what's the best approach, or if we just didn't have an approach, or if we used to have a contract, or what's happening. If we can get some insight on that. I'm just curious of what's occurring.
Thank you very much, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. So we definitely don't have a policy to destroy the bees or the hives. We would call a bee removal company to come assist us with that. We don't do it proactively. We do it in response to concerns from residents. And so, as the gentleman said, there are hives out there that are active, and we just leave them be unless there's an issue with them. I'm interested to hear more about the incident that he referred to, and certainly we'll follow up directly to figure out what was behind that.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, did you have a?
Oh, I was going to try a motion, but I've not asked a question. Okay, so my motion is that we move for the introduction and first reading of an ordinance by title only, amending Chapter 4 entitled Animals and Fowl, Article 6 and Article 8, as indicated in our staff report.
Second. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. And the clerk can read the.
An ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 4 of the Los Gatos Town Code entitled Animals and Fowl, Article 6, Sections 4.60.050 and 4.60.055, entitled Animal Rescuer and Trap, Neuter, Return, Registration and Maintenance of Animal Rescuer or TNR Activist Registration, and Article 8 entitled Beekeeping.
Thank you. Moving on to council matters. Councilmember Sayoc.
Thank you. Two things to report. One, I attended with Councilmember Rennie. The Silicon Valley Clean Energy sponsored a building electrification workshop where we discussed what other cities are doing in preparation for updating their building codes and how to make those more green. And the second, as many of you already know, at Cities Association, we had voted to move away from the RENA subgroup that we had approved earlier this year to a planning collaborative. The reasoning behind that is given the large number of housing numbers that we anticipate for the upcoming housing element, it was decided at a group that it would be best to utilize our resources and our effort to make more comment on the ABAG methodology rather than looking at how we may be trading within ourselves. So more information on that will be coming. It's working very quickly, but our town manager is on the RENA subgroup, and she'll be updating us regularly.
Thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since our last council meeting, I, along with the other council members here and planning commissioners, met to get information on a new metric from the state of California called vehicle miles traveled, which will be used from now on in assessing environmental impacts. And also last night, along with the mayor, we had a finance committee meeting where we discussed CalPERS and Bartel reports on our unfunded liabilities.
Thank you. In addition to what Councilmember Spector just said, vehicle miles traveled, the Finance Committee meeting, I attended Multicultural Day at the Terraces of Los Gatos. I also attended the Leadership Los Gatos kickoff event for the new class of 2020 for Leadership Los Gatos. I attended, along with Councilmember Sayoc, the Saratoga State of the City presentation, the West Valley Sanitation District Board of Directors meeting, the Treatment Plan Advisory Committee meeting where I had to step in as the chair. And I also, as was mentioned earlier in the evening, attended or went with Fire Chief Bowden and Mr. Siegel to Evan Lowe's office and met with some of his staff members about some ideas for fire safety evacuation. Vice Mayor.
I have nothing to report.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. In addition to the electrification forum mentioned by Councilmember Sack, I also attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Special Board workshop where we talked about how to move to be carbon-free by hour purchases rather than just an aggregate. I also attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Risk Oversight Committee. I also attended the LAFCO Commission, nothing too interesting to report. I attended the Housing Trust mixer called On the House with Councilmember Sack also and many other elected officials. I attended the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition dinner. I also attended the VTA board meeting. I guess of significance to report, we lost the vote on the bike and ped scoring that gives San Jose some advantage in getting projects for the grants that are coming. Pretty much the vote went down the San Jose lines with kind of giving an example of what the grand jury report finding, showing how San Jose does dominate the board with their San Jose politics in this case. And I wanted to thank Director Morley, who came and spoke to the board about the Technical Advisory Committee deliberations, although it didn't change anybody's vote there. But thank you anyway for the attempt. And I believe that's everything.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie, Town Manager.
Thank you. Just a reminder that applications are now being accepted for our boards and commissions. They are due on October 25th. Thank you.
And that concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We are adjourned.